Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain, and we look at them with our modern eyes and see what we can learn from them. So in this microfiche time capsule, we're looking at an article from the London Magazine from July 1768, entitled, "Account of the Giants of Patagonia Confirmed." So if you are not aware of where Patagonia is, which I wasn't either until I just looked it up, it is in South America. It is basically the southern part of South America, so Argentina, Chile, basically that area there. Anyway, so let's take a look. I have no idea what they're talking about. They're talking about people, or are they talking about animals? I'm not sure, but we will find out together. An account of the very tall men, people, seen near the Straits of Magellan in the year 1764 by the equipage of the Dolphin man-of-war under the command of Honorable Commodore Byron in a letter from Mr. Charles Clark, officer on board the said ship, to Dr. Matty, Secretary to the Royal Society. So, this is his eyewitness account. We had not got above 10 or 12 leagues from the Straits of Magellan from the Atlantic Ocean before we saw several people, some on horseback, some on foot, upon the north shore continent, and with the help of our glasses could perceive them beckoning to us to come on shore, and at the same time observed to each other that they seemed to be of an extraordinary size. However, we continued to stand on, and should have passed without taking the least further notice of them, could we have proceeded, but our breeze dying away, and the tide making against us, we were obliged to anchor, when the Commodore ordered his boat of 12 oars and another of 6 to be hoisted out, manned and armed. In the first went the Commodore, in the other Mr. Cummings, our first lieutenant, and myself. At our first leaving the ship, their number did not exceed 40, but as we approached the shore, we perceived them pouring down from all quarters, some galloping, others running, all making use of their utmost expedition. Okay, so this ship was had some bad weather conditions to continue their journey, so they had to anchor there, and they went onto shore because there were people beckoning to them and saying, come here. I can see that. I mean, if you saw a ship out at sea and you hadn't seen anything for ever, or very, very seldom, then you would probably beckon to them too. So they come onto shore and suddenly people are coming out of the woodwork, yeah? Okay. They collected themselves into a body just at the place we steered off for. When we had got within 12 or 14 yards of the beach, we found it a disagreeable flat shore with very large stones, which we apprehended would injure the boats, so looked at 2 or 3 different places to find the most convenient for landing. So they had trouble getting to shore. So did they get to shore or not? Okay, let's keep going. They supposed we deferred coming to shore through apprehensions of danger from them, upon which they all threw open the skins which were over their shoulders, which was the only clothing they had, and consequently the only thing they could secret any kind of arms with, and many of them laid down close to the water's edge. So they're trying to show with their body language that they're not dangerous. The Commodore made a motion for them to go a little away from the water that we might have room to land, which they immediately complied with and withdrew 30 or 40 yards. We then landed and formed each man with his musket in case any violence should be offered. As soon as we were formed, the Commodore went from us to them, then at about 20 yards distance. They seemed vastly happy at his going among them, immediately gathered round him and made a rude kind of noise, which I believe was their method of singing, as their countenances bespoke it in a species of jollity. Well, considering there was only 4 of them, and they just said there were 40 people or more coming towards them, that I can see why they would want to defend themselves, or at least be cautious by going on shore. But saying that it sounded like they were singing, okay. The Commodore then made a motion to them to sit down, which they did in a circle, with him in the middle, when Mr. Byron took some beads and ribbons which he had brought for that purpose, and tied about the women's necks, which they seemed infinitely pleased. We were struck with the greatest astonishment at the sight of the people of such gigantic stature, notwithstanding our previous notice with glasses from the ship. Their body was increased by the time we got there. Okay, the number of people, okay, the body of people. I was like, what, did they grow in those 5 minutes? To the number of 500 men, women, and children. Okay. The men and women both rid of the same manner. Okay. I'm not sure what that means. The women had a kind of belt to close their skins around their waist, which the men had not, as theirs were only flung over their shoulders and tied with little flaps, cut from the skin round the neck. That's interesting because I feel like as a generality, like making a general rule, women are more interested in fashion. So I wonder if that belt around their waist was to kind of, emphasize their figures, like, look how pretty I am. Or it might have just been something that only women wore, kind of like, dresses versus, suits. Just a couple ideas. I don't know. I don't know their culture, so I don't even know which people this is. Or it's supposed to be. Supposedly is, allegedly. Okay. At the time of the Commodore's motion for them to retire farther up the beach, they all dismounted and turned their horses loose. Which were gentle and stood very quietly. The Commodore, having disposed of all his presents and satisfied his curiosity, thought proper to retire, but they were vastly anxious to have him go up into the country to eat with them. That they wanted him to go with them to eat, we could very well understand by their motion, but their language was wholly unintelligible to us. Shocking that people in another country on another continent would speak a different language than you, one that's unrelated to yours. I'm sorry, but that's just amusing to me. It was some sort of native language. I don't know which one, so I'm not going to assume which one it was, but yeah. That's interesting that they were like, no, don't go, come and eat dinner with us. They seemed very hospitable, like very welcoming. That there was a great smoke to which they pointed about a mile from us, where there must have been several fires, but some intervening hills prevented our seeing anything but the smoke. The Commodore returned the compliment by inviting them on board the ship, but they would not favor him with their company, so we embarked and returned to the ship. Okay, so he refused to go with them to eat, it looks like. But he did invite them to his ship, and they wouldn't come, so. We were with them nearly 2 hours at noonday, within a very few yards, though none had the honor of shaking hands but Mr. Byron and Mr. Cummings. However, we were near enough and long enough with them to convince our senses so far as not to be cavilled out of the very existence of those senses at the time, which some of our countrymen and friends would absolutely attempt to do. They are of a copper color with long black hair, and some of them are certainly 9 feet, if they do not exceed it. Okay, that's slightly excessive. 9 feet, huh? Because I feel like someone who is probably, let's guess, 6 feet tall, okay, would have a hard time estimating how tall a 7-foot person is. There are people that are 7 feet. Ask any of the professional basketball players how many people on their team are 7 feet tall. So I'm wondering if it wasn't just exaggerated, because yeah, they probably were tall, like maybe they were tall, but I doubt that they were 9 feet tall, because that is rather excessive. So it's just, I have a hard time estimating how tall people are who are taller than me. I can guess much more accurately people who are shorter than me, because I can measure it with some part of my body. Like, they come up to my eyes, they come up to my shoulder, they come up to a certain part of my body. But people who are taller than me, I have a much harder time estimating. I can only estimate with my arm, and if I put my arm way up high and put it flat, like I'm trying to measure something, then I can only go up to about 6.5 feet, because I'm not that tall. But if somebody was taller than me, and if they reached up, I doubt they could go much higher than 7 feet, maybe 7.5. So I'm just slightly skeptical of their actual measurements and the accuracy of their measurements. I mean, unless they took a measuring stick or like a measuring tape or something with them, I just don't think that that's very accurate. Just estimating the height of a person taller than you is just, it's not an easy thing to do, because you have no frame of reference. That their skin was copper color, their long black hair, that's a typical description of Native Americans. So I don't think that that's too far-fetched. But the size, the 9 feet, I don't know. Okay. The Commodore, who was very near 6 feet, but could just reach the top of one of their heads. That's what I said. Which he attempted on tiptoes, and there were several taller than him on whom the experiment was tried. So, okay, 6 foot tall person. How high can a 6 foot tall person reach? Yeah? A 6 foot tall basket player should have a standing reach of around 8 feet, not 9. That's still very tall, but I don't think that 9 feet is accurate. Okay, they are prodigious stout as well as proportionally made as ever I saw people in my life. That they have some kind of arms among them is, I think, indisputable from their taking methods to convince us that they had none at the time about them. Well, that's a pretty good conclusion. So what he's saying is that, I'm assuming gender, because he was the first mate, there aren't that many women who were first mates, so, is that he's saying that they probably had some sort of weapons, since they actually took the time to show that they didn't have any on them when they came up to them, so they must have some somewhere. The women, I think, bear the same proportion to the men as our Europeans do. There was hardly a man there less than 8 feet, most of them considerably more. The women, I believe, run from 7.5 to 8. Their horses were stout and bony, but not remarkably tall. They are, in my opinion, from 15 to 15.5 hands. That's like a normal size for a horse, yeah? They had a great number of dogs, about the size of a middling pointer with a fox nose. Okay. They continued on the beach till we got under way, which was 2 hours after we got on board. I believe they had some expectations of our returning again, but as soon as they saw us getting off, they betook themselves to the country. Yeah, so I think it's more interesting that they had dogs and horses, because I thought that Europeans brought horses to the American continent. I could be wrong. Yeah, there were horses on the American continent, and then they went extinct there somewhere between 8 and 12,000 years ago. And the modern horses, the horses they would have seen on this expedition in the 1700s, was then descendants of the horses that Cortez brought, yeah? Alright, the country of Patagonia is rather hilly, though not remarkably so. You have here and there a ridge of hills, but no very high ones. We lay some time at Port Desire, which is not a great way from the northward from the straits, where we traversed the country many miles around. We found firebrands in different places, which convinced us that there had been a people, and we supposed them to have been the Patagonians. The soil is sandy, produces nothing but a coarse, harsh grass, and a few small shrubs, of which Sir John Narborough remarked he could not find one of size enough to make the helve of a hatchet, which observation we found very just, so the trees are really small. It was some time in the winter we made this visit to our gigantic friends. I am debarred being so particular as I could with, from the loss of my journals, which were demanded by their lordships of the Admiralty immediately upon our return. Weatherfield, November 3, 1768. So, seriously? You're doing all this from memory, and you admitted that you don't have your notes. I'm sorry, but human memory is not reliable. It's not a reliable source. If you had written it down immediately after it happened, then it would be much more reliable. It would be something that you would think of as being much more accurate, something you could believe. But if you didn't have that, and you're just going by your memory years later, yeah, color me skeptical, but I can't believe this at all. I'm going to Google it, though. Maybe there are some rumors of people in Patagonia, so. Giants in Patagonia. Ooh, listen to this. So, Patagones, or Patagonian giants, were a race of giant humans rumored to be living in Patagonia and described in early European accounts and indigenous myths. They were said to have exceeded at least double normal human height, with some accounts giving heights of 12 to 15 feet or more. Interesting. So they're saying that this might even be true. Well, I mean, if it might be true. I find that very interesting, though. Tales of these people would maintain a hold upon European conceptions of the regions for some 250 years. First mention of these people came from the voyage of Ferdinand Magellan and his crew, who claimed to have seen them while exploring the coastline of South America en route to the Maluku Islands in their circumnavigation of the world in 1520s. Okay, well, what happened to them, 1590s. A photo of a 7-foot-tall Selknam Ona man can be found in the Library of Congress. These accounts may also refer to the Selknam people. Selknam? Later writers consider the Patagonian giants to have been a hoax, or at least an exaggeration and mistelling of earlier European accounts of the region. Yeah, so I mean, just like I just said, yeah. I mean, I was extremely skeptical in saying, oh, like, it's an exaggeration. Like, maybe they were tall, but they weren't that tall. Yeah? So that's interesting that some of the people, the Selknam people, so the question is this a real thing or not? And nobody's really 100% sure, but apparently the person writing this article wants people to think that it was. So, and let's look up the Selknam people, also known as Anawo or Ona people, are an indigenous people in the Patagonian region of southern Argentina and Chile, including the Tierra del Fuego Islands. They were one of the last native groups in South America to be encountered by migrant Europeans in the late 19th century. In the mid-19th century, there were about 4,000 Selknam. By 1919, there were 297. Jeez. And by 1930, just over 100. They are considered extinct as a tribe. The exploration of gold and the introduction of farming in the region of Tierra del Fuego led to the genocide of the Selknam. Jeez. That's awful. Gomez, a Chilean mestizo and part Selknam ancestry, has taught himself the language and is considered the only speaker. He uses the name Kiyok. While the Selknam are closely associated with living in the northeastern area of Tierra del Fuego, they are believed to have originated as a people on the mainland. Thousands of years ago, they migrated by canoe across the Strait of Magellan. Their territory in the Eastern Holocene probably ranged as far as the Cerro Benitez area of the Cerro Toro mountain range in Chile. Relations with Europeans. Demise. 2 Christian missionaries were established to preach in Selknam. They were intended to provide housing and food for the natives, but closed due to the number of Selknam remaining. They had numbered in the thousands before Western colonization, but by the early 20th century only a few hundred remained. In 1896, there was a population of 3,000. An Austrian priest and an ethnologist who studied them in the early 20th century wrote in 1919 that only 279 Selknam remained. That's awful. In 1945, the Salesian missionary Lorenzo Massa counted 25. Jeez. Well, like, picture this photograph I'm seeing of the Selknam people and their clothing is very similar to the description that was given in the article. So maybe that is who they're talking about. I find that very interesting that there were more than one rumor of these giants, the Patagonian giants. So, but it seems to me like this hasn't yet been confirmed. I feel like we can confirm this pretty easily. All we would need is a skeleton, like a single skeleton even, of someone that was supposedly one of the Patagonian giants. The fact that we don't have one tells me it would probably not true. So, as I said, it's very difficult to estimate the height of someone taller than you. All you can do is measure it with your arm, but you can't really accurately tell like how much taller than you they are. So I think that that's kind of a misnomer. Here we go. In 1766, a rumor leaked out upon their return to the United Kingdom that the crew of the HMS Dolphin, captained by Commodore John Byron, had seen a tribe of 9-foot-tall natives in Patagonia when they passed by there on their circumnavigation of the globe. I think they're talking about this article. However, when a newly edited, revised account of the voyage came out in 1773, the Patagonians were recorded as being 6'6", a very tall but by no means giants. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If somebody's taller than you, it's very hard to estimate, and they look really tall, even if they're not that much taller than you. I have a colleague who's 30 centimeters taller than me, and he, seriously, I thought he was towering over me. It's like, oh my gosh, how tall are you? You're a giant. But he's not. He's not. He's about 6'4", which is tall, but it's not like enormously tall to the point of like, oh my gosh, that you're crazy tall. It's just that I'm not very tall. That's the difference. So if this Commodore John Byron was not very tall, then he would estimate people being taller than they were, now wouldn't he? Although they said he was close to 6 feet. So it seems like, yeah, they were tall people, but they weren't necessarily the giants people are saying. So, and as I said, there's no skeletons of these giant people. If we were able to see a skeleton and prove that how tall they probably were based on their length of their long bones, then I would be convinced, but not until then. Anyway, I hope we learned something today. I think it was interesting also how easy it is for misinformation to be spread back then, because people had no way to fact check anything. Like, I just managed to fact check 2-3 different points. Where Patagonia is, and what peoples they might be, whatever happened to the peoples that were there, things like that, I was able to fact check immediately. So thank you for joining us on Microfiche Microphone, and please like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next video.